Welcome to What Is It About the Weather, a podcast where we explore the many ways that weather intertwines itself into our lives. I'm your host, Mark Chalanik, and this week we're going to be talking a little bit about weather fatigue. But before we make that step, before we dive into the main topic, let me just say it snowed. It did. I got snow. I was thrilled. I was happy. You're probably not surprised by that. Anybody who's listened to me for a while knows I love the snow. And certainly I was not disappointed on Mother's Day weekend when, I got snow. Not something I'm used to getting on Mother's Day weekend, that's for sure. And it snowed not one, not two, well, not even three or four, but 5 individual times. It was nice. I was out on a hike, and I even posted a little video on Instagram because the last burst came as I was coming back from a hike and stopped to do a little bit of grocery shopping, and chaos ensued in the parking lot. We already got enough challenges getting in and out of stores currently, but a little snow flying around threw people off. Now, you are probably asking after last week's episode, how good were the forecast? Was there any hint of snow in all the different places I looked, the apps, the websites, etc., that I'm theoretically doing a highly scientific test of? And there was indeed one that showed a very small chance of frozen precipitation where I was going to hike. And I had been to the area before, so that was enough to at least pique my interest, because a similar kind of odd, very local sort of snow event took place then as well. So one did. I'm not going to say any names on any yet, because what did good for me this time may fail miserably the next time. But alas, I was not completely disappointed in my weather apps, and again, with my local experience of this area, it was enough to pique my interest and say, hey, it could happen. Collectively, was it a lot of snow? No, but I wasn't expecting a lot, just enough for me to make it interesting. For others, it may have been an annoyance or an inconvenience, but didn't cause too many challenges. I was dressed accordingly, if you will. Another funny thing I ran across this week. So an article that had to do with why people still pay attention to weather, or how much people are paying attention now, or when they do in their local settings. And I guess the statistic was something like 70% of people who still consume a local weather, whether it's television or some other maybe radio or print, whatever it is. That one of the main reasons, the 70% number, was weather, local weather. That makes a lot of sense, right? And then the list went down from there. But the same article referenced that during this tricky time that we're all dealing with, that people are still very fixated on weather. And I kind of laugh because they sent to the readers to a site, analytics.usa.gov. All right, and this is just a government website that tracks where most people are going when they're going currently to U.S. websites that are related to the government. And the statistics are, it says now, I'm guessing that's today or last 24 hours, and there's a 7-day number and there's a 30-day number. And by the time from when the article was written to when I actually saw the article, I think things had changed a little bit. When you go to the short term, the number one thing is people tracking their packages, which I thought was kind of hilarious. So USPS was number one, but number two was, where's my money? So it all had to do with IRS. So the weather it was still on the list. I don't even know if it was on it for the day I was looking at. And again, that could very well be that when the article was written, there was something going on. But generally speaking, it had dropped way down the list of importance. Again, people still think about other things first. Where's my stuff? Where's my money? It's kind of logical. That's probably more important to most folks than what's going on with the weather the majority of the time. Very logical. But it got me back to this thing of, I again don't want to have too many episodes that are focused on the challenges that we're dealing now, except when there could be something constructive coming out of it. And the topic of weather fatigue is just something of a topic that I think we can relate to in that way. So as I talk about this fatigue and this setup today, I think it's important to realize that what I'm really trying to do is think about it from a perspective of what we're dealing with. Maybe there'll be things you'll hear and you go, I'm dealing with that sort of thing right now with the pandemic going on. And there might be ways that we can translate these experiences that we deal with in the weather space into our life challenges currently, but also vice versa. Then we can learn stuff about what we're dealing now and maybe use that when we're dealing with difficult weather situations going forward, or maybe there's some lessons learned, when we're potentially dealing with catastrophic type weather situation, whether it's one that you've got a plan for or whether it's one that you're dealing with firsthand, right? An emergency that's going down and how you might be better prepared to deal with those sort of things. So just something to keep in mind. But let's kind of talk about it. Let's talk a little bit about, now you've probably heard me mention before the idea of storm fatigue. I'm sure I've mentioned it in a past episode. Don't ask me to tell you which one. But for me as a forecaster, it's going to be a little different than you as someone maybe who experiences weather. But before we jump into the weather part of it, let's just talk a little bit about fatigue. I mean, we're all familiar with it from a physical standpoint, if you will, right? We're used to dealing with, or conceptualize much easier of when we're really tired, right? We've done something, maybe we played, I rode just a day ago about a real long ride, right, on my stationary bike because I was doing some training type stuff, 90 minutes, and it was kind of going all out. And I got to the end of that ride and I was fatigued, right? I was tired, didn't really want to do anything more than sit still. But I dealt with the other challenges, right? I might have been dealing with, maybe it was, the physical relationship in my body, the muscles themselves, or maybe it was being dehydrated a little bit when I got to the end of that exercise. All right. Or maybe it was just, manifested some other way. I just kind of wanted to sit around. I was a little more lethargic, if you will. And those are symptoms that most of us kind of learn as we're growing up, because as we're active or doing different things, we kind of learn that fatigue. But the type of fatigue I'm going to talk about today is really something more it's generally called stress fatigue. I call it situational fatigue when I deal with it in the weather space, when we call it the storm fatigue. And we'll get into that. But I think the underlying component, the stress element, is important to think about. And some of those symptoms are going to be the same. You may still feel lethargic and tired, but you also tend to get these things where, your memory comes into play. Maybe your short-term memory is not as good, or you can't focus or concentrate on task. You might have the physical response time challenges, all right? But you might also just be moody or lack motivation. And these sort of things don't always accompany the physical fatigue. A lot of times, actually, people find when they physically exert themselves, they're more focused mentally. Well, stress fatigue tends to be just the opposite. We tend not to be at our best. We tend to lose focus. And I'm going to put a little article in the show note that kind of summarizes it well. All right. But let's talk about that now in a weather sense. Now, when I talk about storm fatigue, in the past, I've generally talked about it as a forecaster. So as a forecaster, one of the challenges that we have, and I'll give an example. So let's say that it's the beginning of tropical cyclone season and a hurricane forms out in the middle of the Atlantic, or even, way in the eastern part of Atlantic over near the coast of Africa. And as a forecaster, in the beginning, it's very exciting. It's like a lot of these challenges that we deal with. At first, there might, the chemical reaction in the body, it stimulates you, right? And so I'm very focused. I'm paying attention to it. Now, as I've mentioned before, forecasters have to be careful about balancing that excitement internally with not necessarily being excited too much about something that can harm people or take lives, right? But it gets us going as forecasters or as people in the work in the weather space. We find that stuff intriguing, and it gives us something kind of to focus on, something to focus your attention. And you're looking at all the little nuances and go, wow, look at this, satellite imagery and this little, what's different about this storm, or, it brings back memories of past storms, whatever it might be. The challenge is, though, not then. The challenge is really a day or two down the road, or a week or two down the road, particularly when you're dealing with a storm. And this is where the fatigue kicks in. You get to a point as a forecaster, you just want it to go away. And a lot of times that has to do with the fact that it's been picked up in the media and it's been hyped beyond, any sort of normal level, right? But even if I take the external components away, I'm looking at this same thing and I get tired of dealing with it, right? I get tired of dealing with this event that is, in some ways, looks the same day in, day out. And that's the real risk as a forecaster. You have the possibility that you won't look at the storm the same way. You won't see it the same way, or it won't have the same perspective of all the data elements coming in because you start to take things for granted. We all do this. It's a very natural step. And so it's important as a forecaster that you don't overly depend on your past experiences. You don't overly depend on what the storm has done so far when you're doing your analysis. Now, those trends and those experiences are useful in guiding you, right? And they should be part of the tools that we use as forecasters. But at the same time, we don't want to rely so much on those things that we ignore key facts, right? That we ignore key inputs that might be useful to the situation. So that's how you when you think about it from a forecaster's perspective, that's the thing. You're trying to avoid doing it on autopilot, if you will. And that can be hard to do when you're looking at the same storm again and again and again, and you just kind of want something new to do. So the same thing, right, can happen on the flip side. And it's what we call, it can still be called storm fatigue, but we'll just call it broadly weather fatigue. And it happens in different situations. It can happen when there's a chance of a blizzard coming through an area, right? And you can even think about it. We all do these things. Like, I grew up in the southern U.S., and it was everybody run to the grocery store to get the couple things that they know they have to have for a couple days in case they can't get out of their house, right? The bread and milk syndrome. And all that stuff disappears off the shelves. But it's different depending on what region you're in, and so it may not be snowstorms, or it could be tornadoes in parts of the country or parts of the world that deal with tornadoes on a regular basis and the risks that come with that. And hurricanes, I go back to it because it is one that's fairly common because of their longevity. And I think that's why they tend to get a little more coverage and a little more study. And I came across an interesting study that looked at that exact problem, is the type of challenges, and it was based on occupational. It was people dealing with working in the environment where hurricanes kind of come consecutively, right? And so they were having to both deal with not one storm, but multiple storms and the realities of whether they would or wouldn't hit. And this applies to all of us, though, right? So let's say you live in an area where hurricanes can come, and it just happens to be that the setup in that season is such that many of them track through the same general pathway, if you will. And you happen to be in the line of that pathway, and the first storm may come and miss you. The second storm may come and miss you, but maybe both of them, those first two had lots of media coverage and lots of people telling you that they might hit you, and you do all this planning, and maybe you evacuate only to be, feel like it's a big kind of effort for no outcome. But maybe that third one comes, and maybe by the time the third one comes, you go, I'm not doing this again. I'm staying behind. And there it is. All of a sudden, it's a Category 4, Category 5 storm, and you are at real risk. And you utilize too much of those previous experiences and not enough of the situational information that was coming to you. But why? Why do we do that? Well, because we get worn out, right? We get tired of people telling us these things. We get tired of being told we got to go and do something. And we try to be good about doing it, yet we turn around and we didn't need to. Or it seems like we didn't need to. Right? So how do you balance that? The one time you needed to, maybe you didn't. Or maybe just dealing with it. Maybe 3 in a row did hit you, and you're just worn out by having to deal with it again and again and again, and the challenges and trying to make sure, maybe you lost power every time you're living in a place like that. We also had a situation in the U.S. this year where there was some tornadoes that went through an area, and it was it caught some people off guard because sometimes tornado, not the warnings themselves, but the forecast that say there's a chance, the probabilities always seem low, because realistically, tornadoes, even if the conditions are right, tornadoes themselves are still fairly rare events. And the likelihood of one hitting you, even if all the setup seems logical, well, it could go 50 miles the other way, and that's a huge difference with a tornado, right? So how do we put all that into place, and how do we deal with that information? And if we get too amped up every time, if we get overly physically and emotionally involved in the situation, it can be very detrimental to our proper response. So those are the challenges that we deal with weather fatigue. Now, I'm not talking about just getting overly excited about the weather. I came across actually it was an article in the UK that talked about storm fatigue, a little different there. But they were talking about it in the regards to the types of pictures that people post, the getting ready for it, and then the big letdown when the event doesn't happen as expected, sort of thing. And we see that same stuff. And like I said, in my southern snowstorms, how many times I was looking at it going, oh, this is going to be great, this could be great, this could be great, and then only to be let down. But then sometimes we're pleasantly surprised when the reverse happens of, yeah, we're going to be disappointed, we're going to be disappointed, we're going to be disappointed, then this wonderful thing happens. So it can work both ways. But all of those things, no matter which side, tend to create a level of stress, a level of anxiety, and can cause the same sort of things we see with physical exhaustion, but maybe more importantly, and this is where I think the dangers are, it makes us not as sharp. It can cause what we call these unforced errors, and to use a little sporting term, where maybe we're more prone to making mistakes we wouldn't make otherwise. And you can imagine the danger of this as a forecaster if I slip up. But it can happen, if you're in situations where you're looking out, not just for you, but those around you, family members that count on you or community that counts on you to make the right calls. And we also have this tendency to get complacent, particularly when the events continue to let us down. And we keep saying it's not going to happen. Or we rely too much on our experiences when we think we went through a similar event, particularly when it was years ago or a long time ago, and we forget the details and how it was that we made it through that, or we don't think about why this one might be different. So all those things come into the fatigue. Now, as I'm talking about all this stuff from a weather perspective, it's easy to see how it relates to some of the things we're dealing with today. Right? As globally, we're all dealing with this pandemic situation. And right now, particularly, right now when countries are reopening, and I know here in the U.S., different areas of the country are trying to get back to whatever this new normal looks like. But it's also a seasonal thing. People want to be outside. It's that time of year here. They want to be doing things. We're coming up on a big holiday weekend that kicks off the summer, if you will. So people want to get out. People want to be trying to get back to normal. Now, the good news in all that is I do think weather provides us a bit of that normality. And I think that's what that article was trying to get to. I mentioned at the very beginning of the podcast. Thinking about the weather and I've mentioned this previously, it gives us that grounding, and that's an important piece. But as I talked about this stuff, could you imagine those same sort of challenges with what you're dealing with right now? I know I have. And I know there have been times in the very beginning, right? As I mentioned, I'm in the New York City area, so I've got a governor of New York making a daily press briefing. I've got a governor of New Jersey doing the same thing. I've got the New York City one doing the same thing. So I'm being bombarded with this information. In the beginning, it was interesting, it was new, and some of it was useful. But as those briefings have gone on, they're too much of the same repetitive thing. And so what I had to do is I had to put my past experiences as a forecaster into play, because that's where I think I've gotten some of the best experience in dealing with these sort of situations. And I had to break away from that coverage. Not to avoid it, not to look for the pieces that were useful in it, but not to get caught up in the same things that no longer provided me information that I was going to take into my decision-making process. And I think that's something that we can all kind of think about as we go through it. It's easy to get caught up in the coverage. It's easy to get caught up in the fighting, even, if you will, about how best should we be dealing with these situations. So what I thought I would do is, just like that, I've applied some of my same rules about trying not to get too focused on the information around the event and about how to best deal with the event based on my previous life experiences, right? Or my techniques of dealing with it with storms. Now, I'm no health professional. I'm no occupational advisor or anything like that. But I have a few techniques that I've used that I think, hopefully it's something that could be beneficial for you. So I'm going to give you my top 3 methods that I've had for dealing with these sort of situations, because I think we can apply it now in all the stuff we're dealing with, but hopefully you can use it in future evaluating weather events. It might be something that has a potential for impact for you. First, I'll break away from the emotional coverage. It's good to get involved in it. It's good to see the hype around a storm as an example, but put it in context. Maybe absorb some of it a little each day, but not a lot. I tend to focus more on written information because it allows me to withdraw the emotion out of it and look for just the factual pieces of information that are useful, the decision-making points. Then I take those facts, so step 2, and match it with my planning and my action. So on both sides. What do I need to do to be prepared? Do I need to go buy 100 rolls of toilet paper? No, I don't need to do that. Do I need to make sure I have enough that if I can't get out for a couple of weeks that I have some? Sure, that's what I do. Planning and action. Reasonable planning and action. And then lastly, and I think this may be the most important, is taking a true break from all of it and laughing and smiling and or meditating. Growing up and even in my early years, I never looked at things like meditation or yoga and gave it any real credence, but I swear by that stuff now. I'm not great at it. But taking a few minutes each day and just pausing and just stopping whatever's going on around and clearing your head. And yoga does this as much in a physical sense. It kind of puts you into a different way, but it doesn't even have to be yoga. Any sort of brief exercise, stretching, something that just kind of breaks you away from whatever routine you're in, whatever position you're sitting in for the bulk of the day, whatever it might be. So those are the things that tend to work for me. Break away from the hype or the charge, match the facts with the planning and the action, but also find time to smile. And as most of you know who know me, I've been through a lot, all right, in the last few years. And that smiling and laughing, it's important. I can't even begin to tell you how important it is for me to be able to create it for others, but also enjoying it myself. All right. So look for those things. See if they don't help you. Let me know. Let me know if you think about this stuff and see how it might be similar to weather situations, all that we're dealing with around the globe right now. And as you try to get back to whatever our normal looks like, because I know we all want to be there. I know I want to be there. Hopefully we can see some ways that, in this case, a little different, that maybe life intertwined itself into our weather instead of the other way around. Pop me an email. What is it about the weather at gmail.com? Or, hit me up on Twitter, either the podcast or me personally. Let me know. Any feedback could be interesting to hear. It doesn't have to be today. It could be, a month or a year from now, whenever it is. But if you think back and go, yeah, that was something useful. Or this is how I'm applying it to my, hurricane preparation. All I deal with, it helped me see things from a different perspective. Let's look for the positives. Let's take away life lessons that can be beneficial from all we're dealing with and help us just forge through our everyday lives. What was the normal? All right. Enough about all that. Hopefully we'll be a little less fatigued together. But if you hear me mention storm fatigue in the future, if I, multiple episodes in a row keep talking about a single hurricane or single weather event, now you'll know what I'm dealing with or trying to avoid in any case. I've got a couple things. Somebody mentioned weather in the markets to me, and maybe I'm going to do that. I've had a couple episode ideas kind of pop up in my head just this week, whether they're going to be good episodes or not. But one of the ones that I like doing is weather history stuff, and I hit a lot of them. But if you have any ideas of past historical events that maybe you heard there was a weather connection to, or you think there might have been, let me know. That's one that I want to get back on the regular docket, which is, these did weather change history kind of podcast, because it allows me to do, it's research in a little different way, because I am looking into history and looking at it from a different perspective, but I enjoy those. But again, any ideas, just pop them in the email or on Twitter, however you want to reach me. But for now, I hope as we reach the beginning of summer for the Northern Hemisphere, or as we wind down the fall season in the Southern Hemisphere, wherever you are, as this weather is changing, that you do find a few minutes to go enjoy the weather, that you can look at it and see the rain or the snow or the wind or the sun, whatever it is, and it just makes you feel normal for a few minutes. And it allows you to just breathe. But never forget in all that as we all know, there's much more to weather than the weather itself.